What's good, Cubers? It's your boy Matt.
And your boy Daniel.
And today we're back with more tips for new Cubers. Let's get started. The first thing I want to talk about when I look at new Cubers' cubes is that sometimes they run what I call niche hate cards. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Cards like Tormod's Crypt. Tormod's Crypt is an artifact that you can sack to exile all cards from a player's graveyard. Tormod's Crypt is used to hate on Reanimator decks. Cards like Choked hate on blue control decks because they can't untap their lands. The problem with these cards is that in the draft, a lot of the times they're just circling the table as players draft more and more cards that are appropriate for their decks. So they're not very competitive in draft, and they create a lot of feel-bad experiences in gameplay. If you're trying to support the Reanimator deck, don't hate it out. Don't run a card like Tormod's Crypt, it's taking up an artifact slot.
Instead, you can just play another Eldrazi.
Okay, I don't know that you need to run another Eldrazi Titan in your cube, but in cube, if you're gonna play a sideboard card, might I recommend a card like Return to Nature? I have to admit, I've been playtesting this for a while. I'm not a huge fan of it, but it does hate on artifacts, it does hate on enchantments, and it does provide a little bit of graveyard hate without clearing out whole yards. Return to Nature is great for spot removing that ensnaring bridge, blowing up Splinter Twin, and it's a card that you can leave in the sideboard until you need it main deck, or you can main deck it and when you realize it's not relevant to the matchup, sideboard it out. Don't play cards like Tormod's Crypt or Choke, play a card like Return to Nature instead if you have to have one. My next piece of advice for the new cubers out there might seem like a no-brainer, but people don't do it, and that is talk to your playgroup. Playtest cards, but talk to your playgroup because they will let you know when a card is not a fun interaction. Let me give you an example. At my house, we don't play Sarah the Benevolent. We find her ultimate too easy to obtain and no fun to interact with. As a result, we've cut her from our cube. When your games are over, or while you're waiting for a game to wrap up, you should be going around and talking to your players. Hey, what are you on? What's working well for you? How did that new card play out this game? What about that thing I'm playtesting? Who's the MVP of your deck today? Get a feel for what they've got going on. Let me show you another decision that we made in my play group. We cut Sarah, and we also cut the swords, because we are not a big fan of the way protection interacts in cube. We don't like pro-green, pro-black, pro-red, pro-blue. The swords feel like that they can just take over a matchup and you're on red-blue and I've got a sword, so you're dead. So we don't like protection mechanics in general at my house either. I spoke to my playgroup, they weren't about it, and we don't play swords as a result. So talking to your playgroup to see what kind of style of cube they like, what interactions that they like, what play experiences they don't like, because it is your cube and it should be built the way you want it, but you can't draft cube by yourself, so you need to listen to your playgroup.
That's how Emrakul got in our cube.
You know, the boy sounds ridiculous, but actually, he's 100% right. He said, Dad, I want to play some giant Eldrazi. So we put a sneak attack, sneak and show package in the cube and put some Eldrazi Titans in there for him to try and draft and play. And we'll play them for a little while and eventually we'll rotate them out and then move them back. But listening to your players, playtesting cards that they want to play, that's a big part of curating a great cube experience for your drafters. While we're on the subject of artifacts and swords and things like that, let's talk about something else. Let's talk about people who run full cycles of signets. Now, before we get into this, I want you to realize that this advice is for cubes that are at 360 cards. If you're in a big, gigantic 720 card cube, run all the signets, live your truth. But at 360 cards, you're giving up a lot of artifact slots to run all these signets, and some colors just don't want them. The best example are the Boros Signet and the Rakdos Signet. Typically, these decks are aggressive decks, and aggressive decks don't want to take turn 2 off to play a Signet. So, if you're playing a Signet, what you're actually doing is giving the control deck an extra copy of one of their favorite cards, Mind Stone, because they're going to draft those Boros Signets and just play them for extra mana ramp, and then you're hurting your aggro decks. Let me make a suggestion for you. Instead of playing all 10 signets at 360, just play the signets for the colors that want them. In my cube, we're going to move to playing just Izzet Signet and maybe just Dimir Signet with it. Izzet Dimir, and Azurius, if you want to add it in, are traditionally the control decks in Cube. So there's no need to play all the extra signets for them if they're just going to use them as Mind Stones.
Instead, you can just play more Eldrazi.
That's the answer for everything with you, isn't it? Just more Eldrazi, more spaghetti monsters.
What's wrong with that, though?
Alright, let's move on to another common new Cuber issue, and one that I myself am guilty of. Stop playing pet cards. Cards that are your favorite cards, but probably aren't good enough for your cube anymore. Maybe you put them in and they aged out. Maybe they were never good enough to begin with. At my house, we got two prime examples, both of which I have cut or am cutting this week, and that is Ilharg the Raise Boar and Morphling.
What do you mean you're cutting the boar? I love the battle pig.
I know you do, kid, and I love the Morphling. 100% guilty there. But the problem is that as time goes on, these cards just aren't good enough anymore. And I know you love the Battle Pig because you dream of the day that you get to slam Eldrazi with him, but the fact of the matter is there are just better red 5-drops, and there are better blue 5-drops. Let me show you what I'm actually cutting these cards for. We're not going to play them anymore. Instead, we're going to play Bomat Courier and Tezzeret the Artifice Master.
We're cutting battle pig for a 1/1?
Yeah, actually, I think we are. We're going to try and help out our aggro decks. I want to push my archetypes and not just play cards because they're fun, and our aggro deck needs the extra help. And we're going to replace Morphling with Tezzeret the Artifice Master because the control decks will like him better in the early game when they can drop him, and if you're in the artifact deck, then you'll still have upside as well. This card helps more decks than Morphling did, and doesn't require extra mana to be held up to protect it. You're not married to your cards. Playing subpar cards just because you love them is going to make your cube less cohesive. See, kid, this is going to make our cube a stronger cube and a better cube to draft.
Fine, but I'm not happy about it at all.
I respect that. I got one last tip for my new cubers out there, and it's all about redundancy. Sometimes you want the same effect. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Look at Ponder and Preordain. These are cube staples. They're fantastic cards, and they're cantrips that every blue deck needs. Not just the control-y ones. The spell-slinging decks, they want copies. Most decks that play blue are going to want copies of Ponder and Preordain, but you're only allowed to play one of each. So what you need is redundancy. Play all of the possible variants of the effect you need to get the density right. So instead of just playing Ponder and Preordain, play Opt and Sleight of Hand as well. They're not as good, but they're still cantrips that help the blue deck smooth out their draws, find their answers, and create value. And I'm not done yet. We're still just in the 1 mana slot. You need to play Witching Well and maybe Thought Scour too. Now, I realize that Thought Scour kind of looks like a mill card, but if you're supporting Dimir Reanimator, it's actually not that bad in your deck, especially with all the flashback cards we play in Cube. I haven't even mentioned cards like Brainstorm, Anticipate, Impulse. If you don't go deep on these cantrip effects, the blue decks are going to be fighting over Ponder and Preordain, and only one copy is not enough to smooth their draws or create value or find their answers.
But Dad, I don't...
Well, we're not just talking about control cantrips, we're talking about redundancy throughout your cube. Let's look at one of your favorite colors, red. In red, we play Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, and Firebolt. But that's not all the burn we play. If we only played a little bit of burn, the aggro deck and the Grixis control deck would be fighting over it all the time, and there wouldn't be enough to go around. That's why we play cards like Incinerate, Lightning Strike, and Volcanic Hammer. In fact, in our cube, we play between 13 and 15 different burn spells. Nearly half of our red spells section is just burn, so that make sure that there's enough to go around to support all the decks that might want it. Now, I know it would be fun to play other splashy red effects that were cool and neat, but you need to make sure there's enough burn for the aggro deck and the mid-range deck and that control deck to use it for spot removal, and as a result, redundancy is key. You see the same thing in green with mana dorks like Landwire Elves. We don't just play one mana dork, one Landwire Elf, do we?
No, we play a bunch of them, like Birds of Paradise.
That's right, and as a result, our ramp deck is very consistent. Well, that's going to do it for today, cubers. Hope you new cubers and you young cubers out there learned a whole lot about sideboard cards and, most importantly, talking to your playgroup. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let us know if there's any content or things you would like us to cover, or me and my trusty assistant to talk about. We'll be glad to take care of it for you. Follow us on the Twitter at cubefortwo, and as always, and until next time,
Shuffle up and keep cubing, our friends.